as Mark was saying before, it's a mandate in the ARC Northwest Coast to address the considerable health inequalities across our region through applied research. So in the long run, we aim to leave a legacy of well-connected and empowered networks of organizations and communities with all the skills as well as the confidence to co-produce work relevant to local needs that targets health and care inequalities. So not only do we flag the importance of research, but more specifically of research that has an equity lens applied at all stages. How that research is done and by whom, it will determine everything about the research and its implementation. So on the one hand, we have the intersectional equity lens that needs to be applied at all stages of a research project. And that's starting with formulating the research question. And does that now mean that all research needs to be about the social determinants or the causes of health inequality? No, it doesn't. But same way that having a wider epistemological approach, so essentially having certain beliefs or assumptions about what can be known, will impact your study. So for example, if you believe something is measurable, you will approach that subject very differently than if you thought it was impossible to measure, to quantify that thing, that topic you're looking at. So similarly, understanding what dimensions of inequalities are relevant to your study, that will impact what you ask, how you interpret your data, your whole research. But giving an interpretation to your data is not the last stage of research. That is dissemination. And that needs to have an equity lens applied to it as well. So I won't ask for hands up, but how many of us have submitted grant applications, brushing off that dissemination section with, we'll write some papers, we'll go to some conferences, and we'll do some lay summaries that we'll try and distribute as widely as possible. And of course, by the time we get to that part of the research, because it hasn't been appropriately planned from the beginning, there is no money, there's no time, there's no resources to look at the detailed dissemination plan and then the targeted one. But we do know better, so we should be doing better. So turning now to patient and public involvement and engagement. Before you roll your eyes at me saying it's a Monday, we'll do it. We'll pretend criticisms about tokenistic ways of involving people don't exist for a minute, but I'm going to bring up another challenge. So depending on the topic you're think of individuals and groups of stakeholders that may suffer from that condition, be it dementia, be it COVID, whatever, or people or groups that use certain services. The difference with applying an equity lens to that process is that you also need to consider people who have experience of the inequalities relevant to the topic you're working on. So the Health Equity Mainstreaming Strategy, or HEMS for short, so the HEMS Public Advisors Group has translated all of that into this infographic. And that's where the idea of the equity thermometer stems from. And that's the equity temperatures you've just been looking at and standing under or voting on online. So it's a rough illustration, again, the public advisors have come up with, of that equity journey that can maybe help us gauge in a crude way whereabout we are, and then start planning where do we want to go and how do we get there. So that's essentially taking an illustrative detour to flag the importance of research, the importance of an equity lens throughout all stages of research, the role of appropriate patient and public involvement and engagement throughout, and finally, that a research project doesn't just operate in a silo. So we sometimes end up thinking of each project as a standalone thing, but each one brings benefits to the wider organization, to the community, and ultimately to population health and well-being. So it's a brick to a wall that serves a purpose.
Cumbria CVS are an infrastructure organisation. We're the largest infrastructure organisation in Cumbria, and we support our communities through, sorry, I won't turn too far, through advocating for our members. They are third sector organisations. We provide partnership and facilitation for collaborations. We develop community resources and techniques for evaluation and research. And we have a commitment to volunteering, so we support volunteer training and volunteer brokerage throughout the county. To give you a snapshot of what we do, we work alongside to deliver projects in partnership with public sector, health sector, and connecting with the third sector. So we've recently done this through some funding with the NHS for the Step Forward programme. So this is the work with those with severe mental illness and connect them into volunteering and employment. And we work directly with the NHS to deliver that programme. We also deliver standalone projects for those organisations who can't deliver them themselves. So if there's a gap or a need across the third sector, we deliver standalone projects. So we do that at the moment with Inspiring Barrow, and we deliver that in the Barrow area to help those children who are furthest away from employment and education to be inspired to fulfil their own potential. We also aim to work closely with our members to develop projects and partnerships that benefit the wider community. We do this through doing workshops, surveys and events such as this to get the most information from our members and the best how we can support them. We strive to respond to the needs of the third sector, so we act as that conduit between the third sector and the community and the statutory organisations to deliver the best services. Through surveys and workshops such as this, we develop and design those services and help empower the third sector to deliver them. Now, this project has very much, like I said, influenced our decisions now. Before we conducted this project, we didn't employ any research and evaluation methods ourselves, so it's really changed the course of where we are now. To give you an overview of the My Futures project. The My Futures project is a part of the Building Better Opportunities programme. This is delivered in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund and the European Social Fund. The project started in 2017 and it's due to close in July 2023. The project aims to help those who are age 18 plus to overcome those personal barriers and move towards training, employment, or education to better themselves. The ultimate aim of this project is to facilitate their self-discovery, their empowerment to move people closer to pulling themselves out of poverty. This is a holistic project and it's done in partnership with third sector organisations, with Cumbria CVS being the lead organisation. It employs patient and public involvement and engagement at the heart, and we always strive to use co-production to inform our decisions. All aspects of health inequalities are explored in this project. By tackling the needs of the individual, they move closer to the employment market and lower their health inequalities. So this project has grown our qualitative and qualitative evidence base to support delivery of this particular project moving forward, but also the future projects that we design and develop as an organisation and for those people that we work with. It's reinforced our knowledge of health inequalities in the area of Barrow and South Lakeland. It's supported our future plans and workshops for delivering support to those people in Barrow and South Lakeland. While we already represent third sector organisations to initiate and enact systems change, this helps us to strategically have an evidence base to support the conversations that we have with statutory sectors. It also demonstrates the benefits of co-production and how we can employ these methods in other projects that we design and develop. It also moves us forward to that commitment to research, developing our strand for the Cumbria CVS. It's also given us opportunities on how to advise the wider sector about research and champion research as a process that they can embed within their organisation. I wanted to particularly highlight the next steps in South Cumbria. So for South Cumbria, we recognise that there's a gap in connection of networks and businesses between the health sector and the third sector. What we do in the north is we have a health partnership manager. She works as that conduit between the health sector and the third sector to discuss and implement change. So what we would like to do is employ a health partnerships officer in the south to work with Teo to replicate that piece of work.
So far today, think about what are the workforce implications of embedding equity to organizations. And I'm sure resources issue will come up, but try and go a step beyond that. So what about skills? What about other things?
Yeah, we also talked about loads of stuff, but I guess our headline was that traditional research isn't practical out for VCFSE sectors outside of the NHS and universities. There's a lot of bureaucracy, the timescales that we have to get research approvals through doesn't match the agendas of smaller organisations and how we can overcome that challenge.
We also spoke again about sort of personnel, and we're saying about, you know, sharing of personnel within organisations. There are a number of people that have experience, knowledge that can share between the organisations, and that doesn't tend to happen, and that's causing inequalities and health equity.
So the question was, where do we think member organizations lie along that continuum? But rather than deciding that ourselves, we looked for clues on our 70+ member organizations websites. We used some keywords like equity and disadvantage and conducted a simple search of all those websites. We then extracted some of the key documents like EDI strategies or annual reports or the About Us web pages, provided they came up as including at least one of those keywords. And although we did this at an organizational level, we felt that as a first step, it would be interesting to compare groups. So you can see on the slide the organizational groupings we came up with, and just bear in mind, this is based on ARC North West Coast membership at the time that this was done, in case you query CCGs, etc. We know how that has changed.
As Katerina said, there are limitations to this. So the limitations are, it's a website. The website is, the questions I ask myself is, how often is the website updated? Are some organizations better resourced around their websites? In other words, they can put more information in. The other bit is actually how websites are searched. So some will use a Google algorithm type thing, and they've got it great, and it gives you lots of hits and wonderful answers. Some are their own internal search engines, so therefore they don't give as much detailed information we have. But essentially the idea was, gather that information. Can you make an assessment of where I, to a certain extent, looked at what they were saying on their web pages and actually put them against the thermometer? And that's what this data is sort of showing you. And so we've broken it down into the sectors. So your general practices, your councils, your charities, the networks, and I'm going to go to all the list. I can't read this one. So National Trust, NHS Trust, universities, and obviously then the CCGs, which are no longer there. So I understand that, and they are changing. But it was interesting to watch you go around the room. And I think what you did when you went around the room is reflect what I found on the websites to a certain extent. But within our community of practice group, we saw a little bit more data, and that's the advantage of coming to the community practice. We can talk a little bit more about the data and what else we can find from it. But the idea was actually looking at the data, where do we think they fit? So I have the sort of, I think I'm reflecting a little bit of what I saw and what was on it. However, I added a couple of little extras to it, and that was more about the research around health equity. And that's what those sort of little bars, which are, you know, which are sort of faint. And I think in some ways the universities are doing the research, maybe in their little places. So the ARC is doing quite a lot of research, but maybe other aspects of the university, maybe global health is doing a little bit, but not as much. And I know some And Jane just mentioned that she doesn't think the university is in the purple. But there is evidence from the examples they've given. This is also based on the research studies that are highlighted and raised on the website, but it's also case studies. And that's where we're looking to see where that patient and public involvement has been. So some within ARC, we know every research study that we do, we'll have some public involvement. So therefore, you know, really, we are ticking that top box and doing that. But actually, if we look around the whole university, we see probably a bit less in terms of where they have some policies, some of them being applied, but not everything is being applied. Where it comes to things like charities, again, I'm getting a sense of that actually there is this level where they are in some instances doing this, but actually a lot of the time, the main work is showing that actually it's just touching that green bit and they're moving in that direction. So there is a little bit of movement. You can argue with me about all the differences. There may be, you know, what you might think your organization is doing better, but what I would say to you is your organization may be doing other stuff, but you're not reporting it. And that may be where the dissemination of what they're doing and what you're doing in your organizations is actually very critical. I know from our community of practice when we've had a meeting and people have mentioned, oh, we're doing all these things. And I'm going, well, that's great. But if you go to your websites, it's not there. And therefore, how does anybody else know what's happening? So you're almost, you know it, but you know it in your own silo. And therefore, what we're trying to do is to get out of our silos and make sure it's practical and it works. So it's a simple exercise. Look at the websites, apply a little bit of qualitative type methodology to it, but really it's just getting a sense of where do we sit. Now, what the idea of this is to start you thinking. It's not in itself an answer to anything. It is just a snapshot. And then hopefully now it is getting into that bit, which I think it was interesting around the room, where identification of health inequality is straightforward, but application of the equity lens in practice is challenging. So how can we push that up so that actually you now feel that you're in the blues and the greens, and then maybe hopefully then you're doing the purples. But the purple is always going to be an aspiration, but I think a lot of the purple is being done through some of those activities anyway. So it's one of those bits that's why I think I've got those little shaded ones, because I think it happens, but it's not happening with everything. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
The keyword Mark mentioned, this is to get you thinking. So what we want to do next is, again, in your tables online, you'll be put in breakout rooms. Now have a discussion about what you've just heard, what you've just seen. Is this the overall picture you would expect? Does it match how you rated your organization? Is any of it surprising? If so, why? What do you think is going on there? And just to flag, because I did see quite a few people, both in the room and online, under the purple, remind you what we were talking about in the morning. So we may do patient and public involvement and engagement, but to reach the top level on the thermometer, this is about doing that through an equity lens. So again, as an example, we think about people who have a condition and ask them to join our research project. Do we think about people who experience the relevant inequalities and of that topic, around that topic, and ask them to join our groups? Is that what we're doing? Because that's why we're going step by step to reach the purple. So it's through an equity lens PPI involvement, just as a reminder. So if you want to just have a chat around your tables and in breakout rooms about that for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to the larger group. Is that okay? Okay. I hovered a bit over some of the tables, and it was interesting to hear your discussion. So going beyond that question of, is it that we're doing the word but not quite disseminating it as well? Is there something else going on? So that was very interesting to see. And we'll go into the last part of this workshop. I hope you still have the energy for that. So I'll ask you to move once again. So remember the ratings you gave to your organization when you walked around the room. So the levels underneath which you stood. And I think we had orange, yellow, green, and purple mainly. If I'm missing anyone, do tell me, but maybe split yourselves across those colors around tables. And have a discussion around specific actions you could take as an organization to progress on that equity journey. So you're whatever stage you are, how do you get to the next one? What's the aim? How do you get there? What can we do but tangible things?
Yeah, we were just saying that we feel like everyone knows what health equity is, but whether it's the will, I think someone mentioned it an hour ago, but we feel like it's the most important thing is it's easy to identify how to improve equity. It's easy to carry out research, but if there's not that will in the organisation or will politically or whatever the sector is you're working within, then it's never going to change really. So it's the research has got to have some type of accountability to will, like if we do find this will change, but yeah, it's like pouring water into a bucket with holes, isn't it? So there's got to be some type of accountability in those organizations that they will, want to make that change rather than just carry out the research, find out things that are wrong, and then move on.
Exactly. Thank you. Anybody else from the yellow level wanting to say something? No. Okay. So green. I think most people online were green, so maybe we can start with them. Again, to say you're welcome to type in the chat, Claire can read it out, or you're welcome to unmute yourselves if you want to share something.
Yeah, there's some comments in the chat. So we had Hillary saying we got into a big discussion about reflection, the idea that as part of the question of how have we considered or addressed equity could actually be a standing agenda item. And then Joe from the same group said, had a really good discussion around the value of reflective journaling as well, focusing simply on how equity is considered at each stage in the research. They're not working. Sorry, is that better? Yeah. Sorry, Joe said a great discussion around the value of reflective journaling, focusing simply on how equity is considered at each stage in the research and identifying next steps. To have this as a standing agenda item in meetings, as Hillary said, to happen organically and collectively to inform reporting of what's happening and what still remains to be done. So that's obviously a very clear action.
Excellent. That's what we wanted. So whether on the bingo sheet or not, brilliant. And yeah.
Sorry about this. Can I challenge you? Sorry, I'm going to
Go for
challenge you. You know where it says, could you give us an example of the orange where we say inequality is, sorry, I can't read from here. So but practice is challenging. Have you got an example that we can take away from here today? Or maybe Paula can help us, anybody?
Yeah, so
where the practice, you know, when we pick up inequality, how do you make it to be embedded in NHS practice or the GP practice? An example. Thank you.
Absolutely. So coming from the research perspective as ARC, one thing we're saying is to get to an equitable outcome, it all needs to be based on research, right? So starting with being involved in equity research, in looking at health inequalities, and even considering the health inequalities and the social determinants, the structural determinants that cause whatever health outcome you're looking at in your practice, you know, considering where that all is coming from, try to make those links. That's already a way of embedding it in your practice. Does that make sense? No, and exactly that's why we expected a few people to be at that orange level. We know it's not easy. So within ARC, we've run multiple workshops where we say, you know, this is health inequalities and this is health equity. Do we understand the concepts? Great, go away and do the work. What does that mean in practice? And that's where we're at this stage in ARC. We want to talk about tangible practice, you know, help people embed that equity lens in their practice in day to day. And hopefully this workshop, the discussions you've had with each other are a start for discussions of those tangible actions. You know, what do we do? How do we do it in practice? How do you do it? What can I learn from that? What applies to my organization? What's different in yours? How do we take that forward? Just use the mic, because otherwise people online can't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry. It's about having the people that are doing the practice to be at the table with the researchers,
Yeah.
like the members. Okay, I want to change my practice, inequality, if, for example, diabetes and the BME community. Looking at issues around it, I want to change that. It's about me as a nurse or as a doctor to be with researchers from the beginning as well, apart from the public involvement, so that we can make that change with funding and resources as well. Thank you.
And just to say one thing to that, you know, when we talk about looking at health inequalities and health equity and those causes of the causes going upstream, a lot of the times the comment we get, but that's too difficult for me as a practitioner, for me as a researcher to reach, right? And we don't expect a single person to change national policy. Obviously, that's never going to happen. But think about climate change. You know, some of us stopped using plastic straws. Exactly. That creates the pressure to the organizations, to the companies, to having to being mandated to report the CO2 levels or emissions or whatever they're doing. That then pushes policy. So it's all a game of, you know, going back and forth between those levels, pushing each other in the right direction. It's not going to be a change that happens overnight. You know, otherwise we would have done it. But it is work that we all have a role to play in. So nothing is too small, nothing is insignificant, even if it's a GP taking part in research. You know, that's a start. It is something, and it is pushing for wider change. Brilliant. So, and I think last one, we did have a purple level. So what did people discuss in that group? Doesn't get any better. We have a blue one on there, but I don't think anybody rated their organization as blue. Or did you change your rating? Yeah, sorry, blue level. What did you discuss? What came up? Thank you.
So yeah, I rated my organization, which is University of Liverpool, as blue. And I was thinking of all organizations have like this set of policies in place, and they say, okay, this is what we're gonna do. But it made me think that that last step into engaging people into our research, like I think it's very hard, because you can commit as an organization, say, well, we're going to involve the people, but within the smaller groups of the institution, I think it's much harder, because then it depends on what kind of research you're doing, what kind of studies you're doing, and then sometimes there are certain groups that it's hard to engage because they are in private areas. So they might have like think that, oh, the council doesn't care for us, so they're more skeptic to participate. So I was trying to think of how can we change that. And I think, well, I don't really have a point on what can we do better. Well, I think it's something just to keep in mind, always try to engage with people and look out for those in more deprived areas, and try to involve them in what we are doing at the institution level.
And definitely something to keep talking to with others, because nothing in this work we do is straightforward. No one person has all answers in the world. But for example, Selena has been working with Seldom Heard Voices. I'm sure there's discussions within there, like how do we get them more involved? How do we reach those hard to reach groups, or whatever they're often called as? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so was there actually anyone in the purple room, or did I dream that? Yes.
I wasn't in a purple room.
That's disappointing.
But there was one around the table who originally was in the purple room. And so it got me thinking about, is there nowhere else to go when you get into purple? And I actually think that might be a bit of an issue with the thermostat, because I think, thermometer, because I think there must be somewhere else to go in terms of constant quality improvement. But actually the interesting thing that came up, I could speak on your behalf, but I'll pass you this, is engagement is not the same as valuing. And that maybe people put themselves, there was a lot hovering around purple for ARC. And you said. You say it. Well, it's just, it doesn't always feel like people are engaged, they're around the table, they are, but it doesn't always feel like their knowledge and their ideas are being valued, really. And so the challenge, even in the purple space where you have extensive engagement, and I think universities maybe, you know, you could say the same, that they talk the talk, they don't necessarily walk the walk. And the classic example in universities is trying to get the fees paid for public advisors. And that's a major problem for all our universities, I think. So it's, yeah, it's this issue of what does valuing look like and how do we achieve that in the art, but also in the member organizations. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely brilliant points. So already working on thermometer version 0.2, but definitely there's a difference between what we think we do, what we say we're doing, and how well we're doing that. So definitely a discussion.
So yeah, so we're talking about patient and public involvement, and one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that when patients or public are actually asked to be involved in research projects, it tends to come from the academic. It tends to come from the researcher. And there are often times when we as public advisors are involved in other organisations, in other committees, have other knowledge outside of org, and that's not actually used. And sometimes people, public and patients will say, I can't possibly be involved because doctor, professor, etc. has asked me, rather than Sandra or Neil, who is a public advisor, who can speak to us on the level that we need to be discussed to get the public and patient involvement. And I think sometimes that's where we miss, trick is the wrong word, but we miss that opportunity to engage.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. So I think there's lots of issues and interesting discussions to be had. We might not necessarily know the direct actions we need to take as the next step yet, but we know we should be having those discussions with the right people around the table to get there. And Mark wanted to make a last comment. I was about to let you go for lunch, but go for it, Mark.
No, I think part of the reflection on the conversations and what people have been doing, I think it does reflect the difficulties I had when I was looking at some of this information. But I think in answer to your question about the purple, I know tomorrow as an ARC, we're going to talk about impact and how do we show impact. And I think that may be where part of this is. It's not just about we've got it involved. It's actually, is it doing anything with it? I think is more, and maybe that's part of that purple step, is actually it's being involved. And actually, whenever I talk about public involvement, it's what's the examples? What do you need to put into it? But it's actually how does it impact on the work is more important to get across. If I have some examples of impact, then it says to somebody else that actually this is worth doing because this has had this impact. And so maybe that's where the purple is going, is that it's not just having the engagement, but it's actually showing that it's being useful. And therefore in organizations, you may then invest the time and resources into doing it.
So this is a call for action, and hopefully you found today as a helpful start for that. And thank you very much for all your patience. Enjoy lunch.